I knew something was wrong the moment my key wouldn't turn in the lock. Standing in the hallway of my apartment building at 7:15 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, briefcase in one hand and takeout dinner in the other, I tried the key 3 more times. Before accepting the obvious truth, the locks had been changed. No notice posted on my door. No voicemail from my landlord. No legal documentation of any kind. Just the metallic click of a lock that no longer recognized the key I'd been using for the past 18 months. I set my briefcase down carefully and pulled out my phone. First to call my landlord, then to start a voice memo documenting exactly what I was experiencing, the date, time, and circumstances of what was clearly an illegal lockout. As the phone rang, I allowed myself a small smile. My landlord, Frank Morrison, thought he was dealing with just another tenant he could intimidate and manipulate. What he didn't realize was that I'd been meticulously recording every interaction we'd had for the past 6 months, ever since his first attempt to force me out of my rent-stabilized apartment. Morrison was about to discover that illegally locking out a data analyst who specializes in evidence collection and documentation was the worst mistake he'd made in his slumlord career. The phone went to voicemail, as I'd expected. Frank, this is David Chun from apartment 4B. I've arrived home to find my locks changed without notice. This appears to be an illegal lockout under Massachusetts tenant protection laws. Please call me immediately to resolve this. I ended the recording, saved it with timestamp details, and began documenting everything I could see in the hallway. This wasn't panic or desperation. This was the methodical collection of evidence that would soon transform Frank Morrison's illegal actions into the most expensive mistake of his life. My name is David Chun, 31 years old, senior data analyst for the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, where I specialize in compiling evidence for complex financial fraud cases. My work requires absolute attention to detail, systematic documentation, and the ability to build airtight cases from scattered pieces of information. I spend my days creating digital paper trails that prosecutors use to convict white-collar criminals, tracking money laundering schemes, and organizing evidence that stands up under the most aggressive legal scrutiny. These skills have served me well professionally, but I never expected to need them in my personal life until I became a tenant of Frank Morrison. I'd moved into the Riverside Gardens apartment complex 18 months ago, attracted by the reasonable rent and proximity to both my office and the university where I was completing my master's degree in forensic accounting. The building was older but well-maintained, with rent-stabilized units that kept housing costs manageable on a government salary. The lease was straightforward, the apartment clean and functional, and my landlord seemed like a standard property manager, gruff but professional. The change began 6 months ago when Morrison sold the building to a developer named Kevin Hartley, whose company specialized in luxury conversions of older apartment buildings. Hartley's business model was simple: buy buildings with rent-stabilized tenants, pressure them to leave through various means, then renovate and rent the units at market rates that were often 3 times higher. I'd seen this pattern throughout Boston, where longtime residents were systematically displaced by developers who viewed tenant protection laws as obstacles to overcome rather than rights to respect. Morrison, now working as Hartley's property manager, became the enforcement arm of this strategy. His approach was methodical: sudden increases in building fees, unexpected maintenance that required multiple entries into apartments, selective enforcement of lease terms that had been ignored for years, and a general campaign of harassment designed to make living in the building uncomfortable enough that tenants would voluntarily break their leases. My training in fraud detection made these tactics immediately recognizable. I also understood that without documentation, proving harassment would be difficult. So I did what I always did when facing a complex problem: I began building a case. The recording system I installed was comprehensive but legal. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, meaning I could record any conversation I was part of without informing the other party. I purchased a small digital recorder that I carried during any interaction with Morrison, and I installed a security camera in my apartment that captured my front door and the hallway immediately outside, ensuring I could document any unauthorized entries or harassment. I also began documenting everything in writing, dates and times of all interactions, exact quotes when possible, photographs of any notices or damages, and copies of all correspondence. Within weeks, I had clear evidence of systematic harassment, Morrison entering my apartment for fabricated emergencies, charging me for building maintenance that other tenants weren't assessed, and making increasingly aggressive demands that I vacate voluntarily. The most egregious incident occurred 3 weeks ago. Morrison had demanded access to my apartment to inspect for water damage following a minor leak in the unit above mine. I permitted the inspection, as required by law, but also recorded the entire encounter. Instead of looking for water damage, Morrison spent 20 minutes taking photographs of my personal belongings, measuring room dimensions, and making comments about upgrading the unit for modern tenants who appreciate quality. When I asked about the water damage inspection, he became aggressive. "Listen, college boy," he said, unaware that I was capturing every word. "This building is changing. You can make this easy on yourself and find somewhere else to live, or you can make it hard. But either way, you're not staying here long term." I had remained calm during this encounter, asking clarifying questions and documenting his responses. "Are you suggesting I should break my lease voluntarily?" I asked. "I'm suggesting smart people see the writing on the wall," he replied. "Your lease expires in 8 months. I'm not renewing it. You can leave now with a good reference, or you can wait and leave with problems that follow you everywhere." This conversation alone was evidence of attempted illegal eviction, but I knew that without additional proof of systematic harassment, a single incident might not be sufficient for serious legal consequences. I continued documenting building what prosecutors would recognize as a pattern of behavior rather than isolated incidents. The illegal lockout was Morrison's most brazen move yet, and also his biggest mistake. Under Massachusetts law, landlords cannot change locks or deny tenant access to rented premises without following strict legal procedures, typically requiring court orders for eviction or specific lease violations that justify immediate action. Simply changing locks because you want a tenant to leave is a serious violation that can result in substantial penalties. Standing in my hallway, locked out of my apartment, I methodically documented everything while calling Morrison repeatedly. After 30 minutes of unreturned calls, I contacted building management and the emergency maintenance number. Both referred me back to Morrison. Finally, I called the police to report what appeared to be an illegal lockout. Officer Martinez responded within 20 minutes. After reviewing my lease and ID, confirming my residency status, and attempting to contact Morrison herself, she agreed that this appeared to be an illegal action. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" she asked. "Yes, but that's not the point," I replied. "I have a legal right to access my apartment, and this appears to be landlord harassment." Officer Martinez took detailed notes and provided me with a report number. "You'll need to file a formal complaint with the city's rental authority," she advised. "This kind of lockout without proper notice is definitely against the law." As she left, I made one final call to Morrison. This time, he answered. "What do you want?" he said without preamble. "I want access to my apartment," I replied calmly. "You've changed the locks without providing notice, which violates both my lease and state tenant protection laws." "Read your lease," he said. I can change locks for security reasons. I have read my lease, I said, continuing to record. Security changes require 24-hour notice and provision of new keys to tenants in good standing. I received no notice, and you're denying me access to my legal residence. Maybe you should find a new place to live, Morrison replied. This building isn't working out for you. Are you acknowledging that you've locked me out to pressure me to leave? I asked, giving him rope to hang himself with. I'm acknowledging that your tenancy here is becoming problematic, he said, his voice rising. Smart people would see this as an opportunity to move on. Perfect. I now had recorded admission that the lockout was retaliatory, not security-related. After Morrison hung up, I spent the evening at a nearby hotel, using the time to organize my evidence and research my legal options. Massachusetts tenant protection laws were comprehensive, with specific penalties for illegal lockouts, harassment, and retaliatory actions. The state also provided for treble damages, triple the actual harm caused, when landlords violated tenant rights deliberately. By morning, I had developed a comprehensive strategy that would address not just the immediate lockout, but the entire pattern of harassment I'd been documenting. This wasn't just about getting back into my apartment. It was about ensuring Morrison and Hartley faced serious consequences for systematically violating tenant rights. The first step was filing formal complaints with multiple agencies: the Boston Inspectional Services Department, the Massachusetts Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and the state's Rental Dispute Resolution Service. Each complaint included detailed documentation of the harassment pattern, with the illegal lockout as the culminating violation. Step 2 involved consulting with Sarah Kim, a tenant rights attorney recommended by a colleague. When I arrived at her office with my documentation, organized in chronological folders with transcripts of recorded conversations, our expression shifted from routine consultation to genuine interest. This is exceptional documentation, she said after reviewing the evidence. Most tenants have fragments of proof, maybe a few text messages. You have a complete case file. She reviewed the recordings, photographs, and written documentation methodically. This isn't just harassment, she concluded. This is systematic intimidation designed to circumvent tenant protection laws. The lockout alone justifies significant damages, but the pattern you've documented suggests deliberate and ongoing violations. Sarah agreed to represent me on a contingency basis, confident that the evidence justified pursuing maximum legal remedies. We filed a comprehensive lawsuit seeking damages for illegal lockout, harassment, violation of quiet enjoyment rights, and retaliatory conduct. The suit also requested injunctive relief, requiring immediate restoration of my apartment access and prohibition of further harassment. Meanwhile, the various agency complaints I'd filed began generating responses. The Inspectional Services Department scheduled an emergency inspection of the building, focusing on safety violations and compliance with tenant protection requirements. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into Hartley's business practices, using my case as a starting point for examining his company's treatment of rent-stabilized tenants across multiple properties. Morrison's response to the legal pressure was predictably aggressive. He called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails that I carefully preserved as additional evidence. He also tried a different approach, offering to work things out if I would drop the legal action. This is all gotten out of hand, he said during one recorded conversation. Let's be reasonable. I'll give you back apartment access and we'll call it even. What about the systematic harassment over the past 6 months? I asked. That's just business, he replied. Nothing personal. You sign a statement saying there's no problem and we move forward. I documented this attempted settlement but didn't respond directly. My attorney had advised that Morrison's desperation to resolve things quickly indicated he understood the legal exposure he faced. The turning point came when the building inspection revealed numerous safety violations that had been ignored while Morrison focused on harassing tenants. Emergency exits blocked, fire safety equipment not maintained, electrical work performed without permits. The city issued immediate citations requiring costly repairs and threatening closure if violations weren't addressed. Suddenly facing mounting pressure from multiple directions, Hartley's company attempted damage control. I received a call from their corporate attorney offering a substantial settlement in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. "We're prepared to offer compensation well above your actual damages," the attorney explained. "In return, you agree not to discuss this matter publicly and withdraw your complaints with city agencies." I told him I'd consider the offer, but needed time to discuss it with my attorney. The attempted gag order confirmed what I'd suspected. This case had implications beyond my individual situation. Hartley's company was apparently facing similar legal challenges from other tenants, and my well-documented case threatened to expose systematic violations across their property portfolio. Sarah and I used this leverage strategically. Instead of accepting a quick settlement, we expanded the legal action to include broader claims about Hartley's business practices, using my documented evidence as the foundation for investigating similar violations affecting other tenants. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Hartley's company had purchased 6 rent-stabilized buildings in the past 2 years, using identical harassment tactics to pressure tenants into breaking their leases. Morrison had been their primary enforcement agent, systematically violating tenant rights across multiple properties. Armed with this information, I made a decision that surprised everyone involved. I chose to become a public advocate rather than simply settling my individual case quietly. Working with the Attorney General's office and local tenant advocacy groups, I provided my documentation and testified about the systematic nature of the violations I'd experienced. My evidence became the cornerstone of a broader investigation that ultimately resulted in significant penalties for Hartley's company and new protections for rent-stabilized tenants. The personal resolution came 4 months after the illegal lockout. Hartley's company agreed to a comprehensive settlement that included substantial financial compensation for me, restoration of my full tenant rights, a guarantee that my lease would be renewed at existing terms, and implementation of tenant protection training for all their property managers. Morrison was terminated and faced professional sanctions that would prevent him from working in property management in Massachusetts. The building was brought into compliance with all safety regulations, and a tenant advocacy group was given oversight authority to monitor future management practices. But the most satisfying outcome was broader. My case became precedent that strengthened enforcement of tenant protection laws throughout Boston. The systematic documentation I'd maintained provided a model for other tenants facing harassment, and the legal strategies we developed were adopted by tenant advocacy organizations across the state. 6 months after the lockout, I was still living in my apartment, now with new locks that I controlled and the peace of mind that came from knowing my tenant rights were secure. The building had new management that followed proper legal procedures and treated tenants with respect. Morrison attempted to contact me once more several months after his termination, asking if I'd provide a reference for a new job application. After everything that happened, he said, I realize I handled things badly. I was just following orders from my boss. I considered his request carefully before responding. Frank, following illegal orders doesn't excuse breaking the law. What you did to me and other tenants was deliberate harassment designed to circumvent our legal rights. I documented everything because I recognized the pattern and understood the consequences. So you won't help me? He asked. "I'll tell the truth about our interactions," I replied. "That seems to be the pattern that caused you problems in the first place." A year later, I completed my master's degree in forensic accounting and received a promotion to senior investigator in the Attorney General's office. My specialization expanded to include landlord tenant fraud investigations, work that felt particularly meaningful given my personal experience. The skills that helped me survive Morrison's harassment, methodical documentation, strategic thinking, and systematic evidence collection, became the foundation for helping other tenants facing similar situations. I developed training programs that taught renters how to protect themselves through proper documentation, and I consulted on cases where landlords attempted to circumvent tenant protection laws. My landlord changed the locks without notice, thinking he was dealing with just another tenant he could intimidate into submission. He didn't know I recorded everything, and more importantly, he didn't understand that evidence properly collected and strategically deployed could transform his illegal actions into career-ending mistakes. The case taught me that systematic documentation isn't just a professional skill, it's a form of personal power that can protect against those who abuse authority. Morrison and Hartley believed they could violate the law with impunity because they assumed their targets wouldn't fight back effectively. They were wrong about that assumption, and the consequences of their miscalculation extended far beyond my individual case. In the end, what started as an illegal lockout became a catalyst for broader systemic change, protecting not just my rights, but the rights of countless other tenants facing similar harassment. The recordings I made didn't just get me back into my apartment. They helped ensure that landlords like Morrison could no longer use illegal tactics to circumvent tenant protections that exist for very good reasons. Sometimes the most effective form of justice isn't immediate retaliation, but patient documentation followed by systematic legal action. Morrison learned this lesson the hard way, discovering too late that intimidating a forensic accountant who specializes in building airtight cases was perhaps the worst strategic decision of his professional life.